started seeing RPGs skipping down Route Michigan, and mortars started getting dropped on us, and one of our guys got shot. Quickly, after those first couple weeks there, we realized that this was a really a kinetic place.
You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade.
To meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
Born and raised in Fairfax, Virginia. I grew up in Burke. I joined the Marine Corps actually as a junior in high school. I depped in early because I realized, college for me was probably not the best idea at the time. I didn't have the maturity or the drive for that. And so I joined, depped in, and then when I graduated, I had a choice of time to go to boot camp. And so I picked August 2001. So we were in swim qual week when 9/11 happened. From my recollection, they quickly pulled us out of the pool, got us out of the pool, marched us to the barracks. They proceeded to yell at us that we were going to war. Now, every recruit thinks that's what the drill instructors do at one point or time in the training. However, the DIs kept on going in and out of the hut and then coming out even more pissed off and angry. If I can recall, we saw some photos, I think the next day, of what happened. However, the whole time in boot camp, I never saw any of the footage. This is going to sound kind of bad, but at a young age like that, I just felt like I'd done the right decision and I was ready to go to war. And I was like, all right, this is, I joined in peacetime, but fully expected or prepared to go to war. And this sort of solidified my decision. I right then and there, I knew I'd made the right decision. That, being in the infantry Marine Corps service member was the right decision for myself. Arrived in San Diego, got shuttled on the base and then processed. And then eventually late that evening after dark, got brought up to camp, San Mateo, which is area 62, I believe, up in Pendleton, and got dropped to my to weapons company and was welcomed by my seniors and just was, of course, a little jittery, a little nervous. You'd heard stories and rumors, and it was from then on. It was on. I was the new guy on deck, and learning experiences every day. We just started doing our normal workup training to be a deploying unit with MUSOC capable, of course, Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Operations capable. I got assigned the Javelin. Became a javelin gunner, so I got proficient with that, as well as learning, because we were a weapons company, we were mounted Humvees, so I started learning to, PM the vehicles, and it just a lot of learning when you get to the fleet that early on. They sort of had said, hey, we're not going to have a normal deployment. It looks like we're going to go to Iraq, or, we're going to war. And so at that age, an 18, 19-year-old newly joined Marine was eager and ready for it. So I was excited. Late January of 2003 into maybe February, we flew out to Kuwait. I got off the plane, got put on buses. Then we followed a Humvee, an MP Humvee out into the desert. Literally had no clue which was up, down, left, right. All the way out to this spot in the desert where the only thing out there I distinctly remember was a generator with a light. Our little tent city slowly became they started building those big 40 or 50 man tents in the background behind us. Slowly started building the infrastructure there to house us. But we still stayed in 2-man tents for a majority of that time. I think once a week they'd bring us hot chow, but other than that we were on MREs and just getting ready for war. And it was exciting times. I think it was the night before we'd had a battalion MWR night, so people were doing skits and contests and stuff like that. And I believe the next day is when they sort of broke the word that, hey, we're gonna, our departure time, crossing the LOD, line of departure, is going to be, next morning at 03 or whatever it was. I remember, we were told, I think every unit's told they're the first ones across the LOD, but we had the confidence that we were going. The engineers in front of us blew the berm, and we were off. And I remember looking through my night vision goggles and out into the horizon. You could see our artillery firing off into the distance. And you could see the rocket boosters they had on those artillery rounds. Everything was sort of moving in sync, and it was actually like almost felt like a well-oiled machine. Our objective was the Ramallah oil fields, and we'd been training for that target for a few weeks prior to departure. And we were weapons company following in with Alpha Company, who was actually going to hit the ground. And that morning, as the sun broke, we started taking that objective. And there was some Iraqis that still there. Most of them were, waving flags and stuff like that. That morning, we experienced our first casualty of the war, which was Lieutenant Childers, who was killed when a Jeep came out of a tank pit, waving a white flag. However, as the vehicle approached the Marines, the guy in the back, I guess, had second thoughts, reached down, pulled out his AK, and started shooting. Lieutenant Childers, from what I understand, caught a ricochet bullet off the asphalt and under his SAPI plate, and where it hit one of the major arteries or something like that, and he bled out that morning. So the reality of war quickly struck home, and I remember it happening about 400, 500 meters to my right, as we were pulling to the left to cover the flank of Alpha Company and taking care of some other vehicles that were out in the distance and some tanks and stuff like that. That was, eye-opening, and to see that happen and to know that this war was going to have life-changing impact on everybody's lives. So we got into position in the left flank, and then we had some targets, and we actually shot a couple tow missiles and, secured some prisoners and started dealing with EPWs and handling a lot. We got a lot of people surrender, so we were dealing with that, and that was an experience in itself. So we held it for, I want to say, a few days, and then the British came in and replaced us. And then from there, we just started pushing up north, and we were on our way. I mean, we were flying up the highways, and it quickly became apparent that the AAVs that most of our line companies were in, there were some issues with them. Every once in a while, they'd break down, and Marines would have to cross deck from one vehicle, from one AAV to the next. And normally 18 Marines in there is pretty packed, and they were putting in up to 30 some odd guys in those things. So they were tightly packed in those AAVs. I mean, we had a couple villages take shots at us on the road, so we, engaged. And then pushing up, we were going to go east and come into Baghdad from, at the time it was called Saddam City, now it's called Sadr City. As we pushed up, we had to first cross Saddam's bridge. Before we crossed that, we had to stop a couple times to let our logistics catch up, get our fuel and ammunition and as well as food. I remember distinctly we had 3 rounds of incoming from the Iraqi artillery come hit us one afternoon or evening. That was scary. Those incoming was scary. But quickly our counter battery, those guys just lit it up. So I don't know what happened to those Iraqis, but they probably didn't have a good day. So the next day we had orders, and we were a main element with some of the Abrams tanks to push over, secure Saddam's bridge, make sure it didn't get blown. I remember distinctly looking as we approached the bridge, puffs of and clouds of smoke in the air popping, and it quickly dawned on me that those were enemy mortars dropping on us, doing airbursts and stuff like that. So as we approached the bridgehead, the Abrams were side by side with us. Some of our gunners were engaging. I remember the Abrams tank firing its main battle cannon right next to us, and I could see the whole hood of the Humvee bow at the overpressure. And then we crossed the bridge, secured it with all the line companies and their AAVs and the Abrams, and then we started pushing again into Baghdad. We got into the outskirts of Saddam City, and we have a few days there. We try to prevent looting and stuff like that. You don't want the Iraqis looting with RPGs and stuff like that. And 2 men approached us, and one was trying to express his gratitude. However, he couldn't speak because his tongue was cut out. And then he showed us his back, which were riddled with scars from lashes and being whipped. And his friend sort of, through broken English and our own broken interpreters and stuff like that, explained that Saddam had done that to him and that he was grateful that we had come and liberated him. And from then on, I knew that, in my mind, we were doing the right thing. And then we had orders that the last known site where Saddam had made a public appearance was his mosque, and we were the main element. Our battalion was going to go in there and take over these palaces that he was supposed to be in, as well as hit that mosque and see if he was there. We had a special forces detachment with us. As we approached Baghdad, the heart of the city. The Fedayeen fighters, which were Saddam's loyal guys, set off an 18-wheeler full of gas, blew up. So it sort of ignited let everybody know that we were in town. And as we came to that city, we called it the Gauntlet afterwards, but it was a gunfight that whole night. We came in there 0 dark 30, and we didn't stop until about 8 hours later. We had to backtrack in some of our routes, and it was definitely nerve-wracking. Seeing guys hop in between buildings, and just eerily like what I had seen in, say, Black Hawk Down, the movie, and it was definitely kinetic that day. We secured the palace, took it, and then some of the Fedayeen tried to overrun the position. We took some hostages or prisoners. I'm sorry. We had our own wounded. We took casualties. We had the Chinooks or the 46s come in and drop off ammo and pick up wounded, and it was pretty kinetic that morning. We had to come in, have A-10s come in for close air support as well, and then we headed down south to Diwania, where we sort of hung out for a minute or two for at least a month, I'd say, and then bust us down to Kuwait and out of country. So in the December, we flew to Okinawa. We were supposed to go there for training and picking up equipment. And then we boarded planes and flew to Kuwait. And then from Kuwait, we went east of Fallujah, camp called Camp Bukrib, which was a few clicks right down the road from 1st Marine Division's headquarters. And our AO was northeast of Fallujah. After being in combat that first time, I think all of us were a little bit cocky and arrogant, having survived and come back. However, things quickly changed for us. I think we were helping our fellow battalion out. I think their unit was 2-1 or 1-1. They had Fallujah, and they asked us to come assist them in a cordon. Started seeing RPGs skipping down Route Michigan at our cordon position, and mortars started getting dropped on us, and one of our guys got shot. Quickly, after those first couple weeks there, we realized that this was a really a kinetic place. Later on, I think in March, the 4 Blackwater guys got murdered. So quickly, we knew something was going to happen. And our response was swift. We packed up out of our FOBs and headed south of Fallujah, where we staged, and then we pushed into Fallujah from the south. Battalion objective at first was to take the soda factory that became our headquarters, and then we pushed up in the lines all the way up to Route Michigan, which is sort of like the dividing main highway through the city, and held those positions. I mean, it was all out. We had the Spectre gunship there, and we had a lot of assets on hand, but the enemy was prepared for us, and they were ready to fight. I remember one time, just the Lance Corporal can figure something out and observe things. And one Marine Landeros was checking himself out on a mirror, and he went to adjust the mirror, and it turned out that was a false wall, and there was a huge weapons cache in there. Yeah, that was the vanity of one Marine, found a huge weapons. And I believe in weapons cache, there was actually a flamethrower and all sorts of armaments and stuff like that. And when you see a flamethrower, you realize, wow, these, they're willing to attack us with anything. Outside of Fallujah, one night, a CH-53 was shot down, and so we responded to that crash site. The bird had been shot down, but they had a fellow helicopter with it. It had landed, I believe, picked up the casualties, tried to take as much serialized gear, and then was out of there. When we got there, the Spectre gunship sort of showed us, it has this, they call it Finger of God. So the IR light that we used this to help us get on site. We secured that site, and that morning I had what we called Saddam's Revenge, which was the double dragon. Food poisoning, I would say food poisoning, but it's something, stomach bug. And so I didn't sleep that night. I sort of posted watch because I couldn't sleep. That morning, as the daylight hit, mortars hit off in the distance, and then 20 minutes later, another mortars got close. So we knew we were being bracketed. Humvee in front of us, high back Humvee. All these Humvees they weren't up, they were sort of they were quote unquote up armored by us. They had some, armor plates, but they were nothing like the fully armored Humvees that we had in, say, 2005 in Ramadi. They took some casualties from the mortar round, and so then Lieutenant Glover decided, hey, we need to get these guys to medical, and we're going to just have them bomb this site. I think we were going to wait around for them to bring in a flatbed truck to put the aircraft on and tow it out of there so it can be used for propaganda. As we mounted up and headed out of that crash site, the enemy ambushed us, and we were in a firefight through a good while through town. And that's when Private Boy was killed by an RPG while I was manning the saw, and that was a hard one. We got to the Cloverleaf outside of Fallujah, on the east of Fallujah, and that's where we dropped off the casualties that we had taken. And then we headed back to the soda factory and sort of relaxed. Doc gave me an IV and recuperated. No later than like 2 hours later, we were out on another mission because of one of the company's AAVs their driver had gotten killed and had been immobilized. The Marines in that vehicle had dismounted, taken a building next to it, but the enemy were trying to overrun that position. So we came and responded to support them, and we eventually got some Abrams support to come with us, and we pulled those guys out. We needed the Abrams because we needed to tow the AAV out of that area. We weren't going to keep it for propaganda. Yeah. And there was also a dead Marine in there. We can't, leave that to the enemy. Resolved that issue, got back to the bay, back to our ad hoc headquarters, and continued to fight. The next couple of weeks, things didn't slow down. The enemy was always trying to outmaneuver us or change their tactics on us, but we continued to fight. And it was very disheartening when the news came that we were going to pull out of the city. We had such momentum. We'd taken ground. Our platoon had basically doubled the size of our AO in one little firefight when we went to remove a ad hoc roadblock down by the main mosque down in Michigan. And we'd been in some intense firefights with the enemy. And it was frustrating taking these casualties, and especially with Boy, to just walk away from it. As our tactics changed, they changed their tactics as well. It was a cat and mouse type engagement a lot of times. They also knew our rules of engagement, and they exploited them if at all possible. Many times in Fallujah were they housing or operating out of mosques. And I remember distinctly one of their companies was taking some significant fire from a mosque, and they called up to the Command Operations Center, the COC, and I had a buddy that was in there operating the radios, and they were asking for air support, and they were getting denied because it had to be division approved. However, General Mattis had come on deck to inspect the lines and was up there, and when he heard the radio chatter, he jumped on the radio and gave his call sign and said approved, and quickly that mosque quieted up. The Marines stopped taking fire from it. Then about a month later, we were on a counter-mortar patrol, myself, and our Humvee was hit by 255 millimeter artillery shells that were buried in the ground. One in the front, one in the back. I don't remember much. I remember hearing my buddy scream, and I was, bone chilling. And it turned out I took shot on the back of my head as they triaged all of us. The explosion was so big that two of the guys in the Humvee and Lieutenant Glover's vehicle got concussions. So it was a massive explosion. However, at the time in 2004, we didn't have combat replacements as they did back later on in the years. So basically, my driver had been shot in Fallujah through the firewall, and he'd stayed in the fob and waited 2-3 weeks, and then he was back with us. So he got blown up with us too. And, as we recouped, I spent the night in Camp Fallujah. They pulled a shot on the back of my head, and then they just said, bed rest for 2 days and then light duty for about 4 or 5 days. And then the rest of the month or two we were in country, they just packed my head with sterile gauze twice a day to make sure the infection didn't get in there, because if they sutured it, an infection happened, it would have gone to my brain. Then came back from that, and then in 2005, we were told we would, normally in the Marine Corps you do 2 deployments and you're done. We're told we weren't going to have to do it. However, I was fapped out to a marksmanship training unit up in the 5th Marine Regiment. the battalion commander wanted us all back, so we all went back to Ramadi. I had just had stomach surgery, very evasive one, and I'd broken my hand as well. But when I realized my buddies were going, I wasn't going to sit behind the sidelines. So I went to Ramadi in spring of 2005 and did about 3 or 4 months there. And Ramadi was a very kinetic city. You know, you left the wire, you knew you were going to get either shot, IED'd, or a complex ambush, or a combination of those three. And of the first 5 KIAs, we had 3 of them were third-timers. Fallujah, we were green-lighted for any engagement that we needed to. If we felt threatened or needed to eliminate a threat, you were fine, and especially in invasion. In Ramadi, it was very, it felt almost bureaucratic. You knew if you were going to fire a round, you were probably going to have to fill out, you know, a big report and paperwork. Didn't stop us from engaging and having to fire those weapons, but you know, you had to justify this stuff in some cases. It felt like, not to say, you know, it didn't need to happen. You know, you have to, as you are becoming a force that's there for the long term. You can't kill your way through this problem. You have to work with the people. You can't overwhelmingly shoot the enemy and not think that those bullets that pass through those walls aren't going to affect other citizens. That's how you can lose the war. And so when they asked if, you know, I wanted to extend, I said, no, I think it's best I go home. You know, I had to tell my mom that I was going that 3rd time. That broke her heart. So for me, it was just made sense to just get out and give myself an opportunity to maybe go to school and figure my next steps out in life. While I was in school, that's when the suicide started hitting. My platoon was racked with some bad suicides. Nelson was the first that we had heard about, and then my best friend Saparsky, who blown up with me, he was a vehicle commander when in Fallujah with us. He was my best friend. Cold as ice on the radio during combat. He was just a really good combat leader. I mean, very effective. In Ramadi, he was meritoriously promoted to staff sergeant, which is unheard of. You know, he's a walking legend in my mind. His suicide really impacted me to this day. And because of that, you know, I testified on Congressional Subcommittee about suicide prevention. And then after I graduated, I testified on the VA's vocational rehabilitation. So because of the hard work I put into working on myself, I believe that's how I've been doing better. But recently, the news of my recent diagnosis with multiple sclerosis and MS, and I'd be taking it a lot worse had I not done those few years off to work on myself. I learned better coping mechanisms. You know, I quit drinking. I don't have any more alcohol in my life. And had this news happened 4 years earlier, 5 years earlier, it would have been a lot more detrimental. I would have taken it a lot worse. But because of the foundational skills I learned, I believe that, you know, I'm now dealing with this diagnosis, and I'm gonna fight my way through it. I'm gonna champion it. Nowadays, you know, I still remain active. I still try to take veterans into the backcountry, help them out. You know, I really see the value in a lot of these veteran organizations, you know, helping veterans in different forms. There's no magic bullets that's going to resonate with all the veterans. It's you sort of have to try them all, and you take what you use out of it, and then leave the rest. The generosity of Americans and its willingness to help us is touching, to say the least. I've benefited directly because people are willing to help me, and therefore I try to pay it forward. The biggest thing is now that we communicate to each other and we check in on each other. That whole experience in the Marine Corps was just amazing. You know, yeah, there was some hard times. It's the bitter and the sweet. You know, the saddest, most upsetting days were in the Marines, but also some of the most engaging and feeling like I've done something with my life were those days as well. So you get the peaks and the valleys, as they say. And it's about just recognizing that and learning that, okay, sometimes I'm in that valley. I'm going to reach out to my buddies. I'm going to reach out to those guys and get a laugh. Who cares if they're going to make fun of me for something I did in the past? That's part of the telling stories and reliving those moments. But it lightens it, and it makes us, remember those days. I think fondly of those days, and without a doubt, I'm better for having those experiences, not without.